Thanks for reading that passage for us. Sunday, the 12th of July. I wonder what in the original plans of this year you thought you would have been doing today. For Matt and I, we would have been coming home from having spent some time off work in the Lake District. Now, Matt and I love the Lake District. It's one of our happy places. It's one of my happy places throughout my whole childhood. And many of you know, I love to be up a hill or in a valley or going down a river. Yet there are always moments on every trip to the Lake District, to Northumberland, to whichever mountainy, hilly area you're going to, where nature seems to make you say, what in the world am I doing this for? It's that moment when you're walking up a hill and the wind and the rain are coming and you're like, why? Why am I not sat in a lovely warm pub having a beer sat by a fire? I wonder if you close your eyes, can you think of a time, can you picture yourself on that walk where maybe one of your family kept saying, oh, it's okay, that's the top, we're nearly there, that's the top. And yet every time you got to that next kind of lump, it turned out there were 3 more lumps that you could see, and it seemed like it was never ending. Or maybe one of those walks where you kind of set off and it's just meant to be a little poodle, nothing major. And then the wind comes. And it's that kind of wind that is swooshing and you're finding it hard to stand up. And maybe the rain's coming as well. And that really does feel like someone is throwing pins at your face. Ow, 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 ow. Can ask Matthew for a story about when that happened to us. Or maybe it's one of those shopping trips which never seems to end. There's always one more shop, just one more, and you've got tired feet and you do not want to be there. The strange thing is that I always want to return to the outdoors. Despite those moments of ah and ow and why and oh, this really was a bad idea. I still want to go. Because I know that what comes when I stand on top of that mountain and I see the landscape. When I stand in awe, sometimes sit in awe because my legs are quite tired. When we look with amazement at God's creation, there's something incredible about when that happens. And the fact is that all that has happened beforehand suddenly becomes worth it. Because there is the joy of having climbed to the top of that hill and being able to say that. That feeling of conquering, of having made it. For the growth that happens within us, both physically and mentally, when we come out and we see the glory around us. Now, here we have in 1 Peter a letter being written to people who are currently in that kind of trudging, going uphill. They are suffering persecution. They are fearing death. And we must first stand and acknowledge that this is still happening in the world. And my response would be that we should offer our prayers and our actions to the places in the world where persecution is a daily threat. So what is the author saying here? The author is pointing out that there is hope in light of adversity. No matter what the wind, the rain, the false peaks of your life today, it is that there is still hope. There will be moments of awe, wonder. The passage uses the phrases glory, gladness, and joy. Because the author is reminding these followers to hold on in this fiery ordeal. this refining time. This is not about God being absent when we suffer, but God working within and through us in light of the experience we are having because we are living the life of a Christian. The language of refining appears multiple times in the Bible. And one of the most beautiful illustrations I have ever discovered about the idea of refining is that when a goldsmith is putting metal into a fire, they know that the gold is pure when they can see their reflection in it. When all of the contamination and other things have gone. God's desire is to see himself reflected in us. For the adversity and the fiery ordeal that happens in life to be refining us. For the adversity to shape us in our faith. The passage acknowledges that suffering happens and that suffering is real. We see this throughout the Bible, especially seen in the book of Psalms. I wonder if you take a moment, what images spring to mind when we say the book of Psalms? What pictures do you find yourself reminded of? Maybe passages of comfort, of peace, of rest, of hope. But yet a third of the Psalms are Psalms of lament. These are Psalms where the psalmist is crying out due to the suffering that they are experiencing. They are in pain. There are emotions of anger and distress and a sense of loss and crying out to God and saying, "Where are you right now?" There is weeping as the psalmists struggle on their knees that they want God to come and intervene in the situation they're experiencing. And yet, of that third, nearly all of the psalmists are resolute to trust God by the end. They write at the end declaring God's promises over them, saying that he is a good God, that he is great, that he is powerful, even if the situation hasn't yet changed. And of the ones that we don't find this resolve towards who God is and trusting in that, in the circumstance, they are still a dialogue with God. Suffering here in 1 Peter is not about absence of God. Suffering is not the absence of God here. Instead, it is about noting how God is at work in and through the difficult times of living life by faith when we find ourselves experiencing adversity. When I was trying to work out what to say and what these kind of words, these sort of jargon phrases that we're finding more and more in society with this kind of a greater understanding of our mental health and self-help kind of theories around the place. I read this. Adversity tests the reality and quality of faith. Adversity tests the reality and the quality of faith. When it gets hard to live life as a Christian, to live life following Christ in the way that Christ wants, in the way that Peter has been telling us in this book, do we hold on to God? Do we run away for other comforts? Or maybe gently slide away, step by step, away from living how this letter and the Bible has been telling us to? Does our faith become more of a theory than a reality? So the question is, are we resilient? Are we people who are able to keep relying on God despite whatever may be happening? Resilience, when used in physics, is about the ability of an object to return to its original shape. It contains themes of elasticity, of that flexibility, of it not becoming impacted by what it has experienced in a long-lasting kind of way. Resilience is not simply that idea of powering through, of just keeping on going despite what's happening. It's also not the idea of pretending that everything is okay. No, I'm fine. Resilience needs to have an acknowledgement of the adversity that is being faced, while simultaneously holding on to God and allowing ourselves to be held on to by God. An acknowledgement of what is being faced, holding on to God, and allowing God to hold on to us. I haven't found magical big ways of becoming more resilient in life. But I have noticed that it appears to be the smaller little steps that go about meaning when disaster strikes, we're in a better place to respond. Maybe it's like some of those small decisions that Ben was talking about last week, about what are we giving our time to? Are we deciding in that moment to open up the Bible app or open up an app that is a distraction from what's going on? Sometimes that's needed, as long as the place of being held on to is in our faith. It's the little choices about deciding to praise God when we're feeling low and we're not really sure what He's up to, and when we're good and it maybe seems like we don't really need Him because everything's fine. This passage is talking about the response. It's talking about the way that we handle when things seem to go a bit wrong. Are we people who accept that challenge? Are we people who face our circumstances with an acknowledgement of what's happening, but also holding on to our faith and being true to what our faith calls us to do in that circumstance? The passage acknowledges that difficulty happens. It acknowledges that suffering is a part of living a life of faith, because the world is not necessarily living that way. But yet the passage finishes with these words: Therefore, let those suffering in accordance with God's will entrust themselves to a faithful Creator while continuing to do good. Are we continuing to do good, despite the fact that there is a refining process that is happening, despite the fact that there is a fiery ordeal that is purifying, that is bringing out the quality and the reality of our faith. I personally quite like how the Message finishes this passage. So, if you find life difficult because you're doing what God said, take it in stride. Trust him. He knows what he's doing, and he'll keep on doing it.